An industry that wants you to believe it's all about magic, art, beauty, changing your life, and low-risk or pain-free procedures. The reality, risks are real and include death. This isn't beauty, it's medicine.
You might be thinking, I will never have any work done, so this podcast is not for me. We intend to argue the contents of this podcast should concern everyone. Life events can change how you feel. Manipulative advertising can catch you by surprise and create or exacerbate insecurities. Your children are being targeted by this industry too. If you know the industry tricks, what to look out for, and are fully informed, then you are likely to be able to safeguard yourself should you decide to get a procedure done.
This program's content is provided solely for informational purposes and should not be construed as medical, legal, or financial advice. Views expressed are opinions only. Our discussions are general and not focused on specific companies or individuals unless explicitly mentioned. We strongly recommend consulting a qualified medical professional before contemplating any major or minor medical procedures. Be advised that some content discussed may be distressing. Discretion is advised. The hosts of this program believe all people should be able to access cosmetic surgery procedures free from judgment. Welcome to Surgery Secrets, Beauty's Dark Side. I'm Maddison Johnstone and I'm co-hosting this with Michael Fraser. This is a one-of-a-kind podcast in that it intends to explore the dark themes of the cosmetic surgery and injectables industry. An industry that wants you to believe it's all about magic, art, beauty, changing your life, and low-risk or pain-free procedures. The reality is very different. Risks are real and include death, and pain and poor outcomes happen. This isn't beauty, it's medicine. Episodes will be dedicated to different aspects of the beauty and cosmetic industry in a way that has never been done before. This podcast will feature prominent guests, but will also include unheard voices in an attempt to balance the incredible amount of cosmetic surgery marketing currently inundating the Australian public. Season 1 will focus on Australia, with the intent to do further seasons abroad. You can follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Operation.Redress for snippets and shorts from today's episode. We will also be releasing topics and future guests here.
You might be thinking, I will never have any work done, so this podcast is not for me. Stay tuned. We intend to argue the contents of this podcast should concern everyone, not just those getting procedures. Life events can change how you feel. Manipulative advertising can catch you by surprise and create or exacerbate insecurities, driving you to get something done. Your children are being targeted by this industry too. If you know the industry tricks, what to look out for, and are fully informed, then you are likely to be able to safeguard yourself should you decide to get a procedure done. Maddison, this is our first ever episode. People aren't familiar with us, so let's sort of run through the little program we have of things we want to discuss. So this episode will be covering who we are, why we got into the cosmetic surgery industry, and what has happened so far in Australia after the cosmetic cowboy scandals were exposed in the media. We were actually in all 3 documentaries, and if you want to watch them for yourself, you can access these by heading to our Instagram at operation.redress, and our link tree lists these links, which are freely accessible on YouTube.
A lot has happened since that first documentary aired on October 25, 2021. A doctor has died. There's a massive class action ongoing, and doctors have either been restricted or suspended through regulator intervention. We're going to provide a thorough update on that later in this episode.
First, I'll explain a little bit about who we are. We often say you might not know who we are, but you will know our work. We are consumer and worker advocates who have helped expose some of the most prominent corporate scandals in Australia, leading to federal regulatory changes in 3 sectors.
You kind of started with 7-Eleven. This was an incredibly prominent underpayment scandal that you were credited for being instrumental in exposing. It ended up having, I think, $170 million go back to 4,000 workers. And that is an incredible feat for a consumer and worker advocate to have been so significant in exposing that. And I know that you were very dedicated in how you went about that. You spoke to academics, lawyers, politicians, journalists to make sure that these workers and franchisee stories were heard.
7-Eleven was truly amazing, that whole experience. So sort of after that, I didn't want to work alone. So we met and started working together. And our first thing that we did was Domino's Pizza, which is a listed company in Australia on the stock exchange. And we actually traveled around Australia for 16 days. We were getting like no sleep, 20 to 21 hour days. Franchisees were struggling financially and the workers were also being underpaid. And that's sort of a bit of a byproduct. Franchisee struggles, worker gets underpaid. And an international student approached us as well, who had a recording of a franchisee trying to sell a visa to them for $100,000, and that's not allowed. And the stories that we heard were truly remarkable.
Yes, Domino's was very complex. And after that, we jumped into Retail Food Group, which for those who don't know was the parent company and a listed company on the stock exchange, which owns Donut King, Gloria Jean's, Brumbies, Michelle's Patisserie, Crust Pizza, and a few more, and some overseas as well. And that was also another very complex franchise network with many issues.
Yeah, again, we travelled this time down the east coast of Australia, and I think we looked at, 70 stores? Mm. And the unique thing about that is the franchisees were struggling so much that they were just begging for help when you met them. They were happy to tell you everything. They had nothing to lose. They were literally going to lose everything. And I think one of the worst brands that they had was Michelle's Patisserie, which is used to be like a real beautiful cake business until Retail Food Group bought it. And then they changed it to a frozen model, and the franchisees were having to buy the cakes from them, and they were turning up with mold on them and big cracks in them and even hairs. And these franchisees were in a position where they often had ordered that in for someone's birthday, and it really impacted their business. Imagine if your cake you order from this shop turns up moldy, you never buy one again. So we actually worked to help get a class action up against Retail Food Group for Michelle's Patisserie, and that's running in the courts now. And then we moved on to other things.
Yeah, and we still keep an eye on the franchising sector, but fast forward to 2020 and the world changed. A pandemic was announced. We were in and out of lockdowns. It was strange times. And we got a call from a whistleblower in the cosmetic surgery industry. I think for us, that was a sliding doors moment where who knows what we'd be doing right now if it wasn't for that phone call. Neither of us had any idea of what was to come. The stress, the fear, the intensity, the workload, the unknown years of commitment.
I remember various people from the industry telling us to watch our back because looking into the cosmetic surgery industry could get us physically harmed. And I remember one person saying from the industry, don't ever get between a doctor and their money. And luckily, we never had any threats against our safety. Now, there was an injunction to stop the first documentary that was coming out, and the media and the whistleblowers were sued by the business being exposed. But what a lot of people don't know is we were actually named in the court documents as well.
And I think another thing people don't fully understand is that we are just a 2-person team. We are entirely self-funded. We don't get any kind of special legal protections doing public interest research or being consumer advocates. So we're on our own. And it can be really challenging for us, but we feel it's really important to bring these issues to light.
So late one night, you stepped out. I think you got coffees. We were working late yet again. And I get a call from a whistleblower. And he was talking about his concerns in the cosmetic surgery industry and the practice where he worked. And he told us to get on social media and have a look at how doctors were advertising in Australia. And that was the start of our journey into the cosmetic surgery world, because what we saw, we kept saying to ourselves, can this be legal? Are these doctors allowed to do that? Where is the regulator? Why aren't other medical professionals calling this behavior out? It was so shocking what we were seeing. And despite having had no interest in that industry, we felt compelled to do something about it because we believed that it was a sign of bigger issues.
And from here, our business direction entirely changed. We were thrown into an industry which was manipulative, powerful, and wealthy, and they would fight to hold on to their status, power, and money, no matter what. It was really disturbing to see so many doctors advertising in a way which was demeaning and minimizing.
I remember we tried to reach out to people in the industry, surgeons, doctors, all kinds of people, to see what could be done. And there was very little interest in getting involved. And some just said, oh, that's just the industry. The regulator doesn't do anything about it. What are you going to do? And just like with franchising and wage underpayments and toll roads and all the other things that we've been involved with, we thought, oh, so we're going to have to do this now. And that's where our life was uprooted, wasn't it?
Yeah. To give people an idea of what we were seeing initially, some doctors were doing nude and topless photo shoots. We saw instances of doctors asking their patients to direct message them selfies or lifestyle photos, often of their patients in bikinis or topless. And we also saw other instances of doctors hosting champagne nights where their patients would come around and they'd get in lingerie and there'd be a big photo shoot for social media. It blew my mind that this was appropriate, or what seemed to be industry standard in the cosmetic surgery industry. And then we had the most followed cosmetic surgeon in the world, an Australian doctor, open an OnlyFans account, and the bio said, "See my surgeries up close, in detail, uncensored." And we thought, well, this is now a public interest matter in our opinion, so we bought a subscription, $10 a month. The card manufacturer actually immediately cancelled the card. They deemed it a suspicious transaction, which I think is quite telling in and of itself. So we got in and there was a patient on there. It looked like it was, fully consensual, but I think the point was that you should not be in a position where as a patient you are being asked to go on your doctor's OnlyFans account. And that account was discontinued quite quickly. And jumping back to social media, there was concerning lyrics as well on top of some of the content that was going out. And I'll read that out. "Freak like me. Yo, the homie smoking. Cut my brain in half. Put my dick in her mouth." And then we had other advertising which turned much darker. Again, one doctor actually reenacted a skincare regime scene from the R-rated American Psycho movie, which stars Christian Bale.
So Madison, our next episode is dedicated to the advertising of the cosmetic surgery procedures in Australia and how it manipulates you and drives insecurity. So we won't go too much into that now. But we were absolutely astonished. I think if it had continued to go unchecked, we would have seen other doctors starting OnlyFans accounts and asking their patients to go on them. That was our fear.
Absolutely. 100%. I mean, it was essentially a slow creep of the standards. So why wouldn't they start opening OnlyFans accounts?
It's important that the advertising was pulled into line, and that's really what we fought for. We were also seeing examples of what was meant to be like a sterile field where no germs are in the clean area essentially being breached, the theatre doors being left open during operations, and mobile phones in the operating theatre. And the worst case that I saw was one surgeon had 2 phones in his hand during the operation, or whilst the patient was on the bed at least, and the patient was getting surgery, was wide awake because they kept the patient awake for the procedure, so local anaesthetic, and the patient was filming some of the surgery as well. So I saw 3 phones in the operating theatre. You just have to ask yourself, these are medical professionals. What on earth are they doing, turning an operating theatre into some sort of social media film marathon where there's just endless recording? And you would often see things like nurses walking into the operating theatre where they were cutting someone open and putting in breast implants where things have to be really sterile, especially in that environment. And you would see them glove up in the background, out of the shot, put the gloves on, and then pick their phone out of their pocket again, have a quick more read, not even wash their hands, and then walk up and start assisting the surgeon with the breast implants. Shocking.
We aren't healthcare workers, but even to us, that seemed wrong. And I think part of our confusion was that we could not understand why this was happening publicly for everyone to see and nothing was being done about it. So it was completely shocking. It has been over 3 years now since we started looking at the cosmetic surgery industry. I think it's really important to acknowledge the whistleblowers who came forward. There is industry-wide reform currently happening, and that simply would not have happened had these 2 whistleblowers not come forward. We're actually lucky enough to have had Justin Nixon appear on this podcast, and his episode will be released in the future talking about all things whistleblowing. That is going to be a must listen for other healthcare workers, but also patients, just for them to get a sense of what is wrong and when they should trust their gut and run away. And I think that it's really important to pay tribute to Lauren Hewish and Justin for what they did, and the fact that now there is industry-wide changes which came in on July 1 this year. And let's have a look at those changes now.
What Justin and Lauren did was truly amazing, and I don't think there are many people out there that really would understand just how much they did and how much they risked to protect people that they didn't even know, and will never know that because they spoke up that they were saved from future harm. And that's the thing. We know that there's been over 1,000 people who've come forward for a class action against the practice where those 2 nurses worked. But how many people didn't get harmed in the future because that practice is no longer? So what they have done is really immeasurable. So after the documentaries aired, our medical regulator here, AHPRA, commissioned a report which had a bunch of recommendations, and they implemented all the recommendations, which took some time for the report to happen, and then the implementation. And as of 1 July this year, all those new guidelines came in, which were not just for advertising, they were for surgical standards in both cosmetic surgery and cosmetic injectables. So big changes, largely welcomed by industry, but there are quite a few unhappy cosmetic doctors, nurses, and plastic surgeons. Plastic surgeons seem to be the most upset. So let's talk about some of those changes. One is that you have to get a referral from a general practitioner now before you can go and see a plastic surgeon or a cosmetic surgeon to go and get a procedure. Before, what happened was people would see these doctors online showing a glamorous lifestyle and making everything look fun and exciting, and they would sort of spontaneously book surgery. And so now having to go to a GP kind of forces someone to think through their decisions, because they have to go to an appointment to then get the appointment with the doctor. And there's actually 2 consultations required. So you have to do, the first one can be virtual, but then you've got to do at least a physical one with the person who's doing the surgery. We think that's important because it makes patients slow down and have a think about what they are doing, because so many people say they regret surgery later in life based on what we've been hearing.
And it can change their lives, this surgery, but not often in the way they think. And if they're just looking on social media, they think that it's going to change their lives for the better. So by going to a GP first, they are forced to slow down a little bit and just be a little bit more thinking about what they're doing and not just rushing into it, which you and I think it's actually a good idea. Another change that came about was there's now mandatory mental health screening, and there's been a lot of confusion around this, and it's actually been really disappointing to see the fear-mongering around this as well by some commentators. So patients they're going to have a mental health screening by the doctor who's doing the surgery or at that clinic. And they're not forced to see a psychologist. They're not going to be denied to have surgery if they are asked to go see a psychologist automatically. This is there to help protect them if they have some form of mental health issue or mental health disorder, things like body dysmorphia or an eating disorder. We know that patients with eating disorders were being operated on. They were being given the green light to have cosmetic surgery without any psychological intervention or help. And that was disturbing for us to see. So the fact that now there is something, it's not perfect, but now that there is something to screen for people who might need further help with their mental health, that can only be a good thing. And it's disappointing to see doctors especially suggest that psychologists are already overwhelmed, and by putting patients in their care, it's going to be a burden on the system. These are patients who need help. It's not your everyday person who is struggling with something on their body. It's people who actually need mental health help, and they are not a burden on psychologists. And I think that's really important for these patients to know.
Another rule that's come out with the new guidelines is that the patients must be given an opportunity to view images before consenting to them in advertising. And when we speak about advertising, we will talk a little bit about this, but we'll also devote some other episodes to talking more about consent and issues around consent. But what we were seeing and what we were hearing is when it came to advertising and getting patients to take photos, is that they were often confronted, if you will, right before surgery. So they're standing there, sometimes naked, about to go into the operating theatre, and the doctor would say, just do me a quick favour, would you just enable me to make a video and, put it on social media for educational purposes? And when you talk to the people that consented, they really didn't consent. They said, well, what was I going to do? I was about to have surgery. I don't want to upset the person who is going to cut me. So they would say yes, but don't show my face. They had no idea what was being done or the framing of the imagery. So the other thing about that is that you would assume that a clinical image was being taken on a practice camera, but it was often the doctor's mobile phone. It was not isolated to the area that they're doing surgery on. they'd often just take a full nude on their phone. And what we have heard that happens in the industry, which is really concerning, is that they would then take that photo and send it into a WhatsApp chat or something to the entire practice and say, they weren't being creepy about it. They would say, oh, file this under Mary's account. But everybody in the practice had access to it, even people that weren't in at work that day. The tech support, whoever else is involved in the business were in those groups. So imagine you feeling insecure and naked, thinking a doctor took a photo of your, the upper portion of your left breast for clinical advertising or educational content. And then now an entire nude of you has been sent through the entire office and you have no idea. And you have no idea who has access to that or what they're doing with it. So these rules are kind of a start in saying you need to be able to see what the doctor's putting out before they put it out. And the most important thing is that even if you do consent to the advertising, you have right at any time to say, no, I withdraw my consent, take that down.
These are important rules to help patients better protect themselves as well. Patients should know that sort of what you were alluding to is that it's now written down in the new guidelines that doctors cannot store patient photos on their personal electronic devices. So if you're listening to this and you have a consult coming up, make sure that the doctor or the clinic is not taking these very intimate images of you on a personal electronic device. There are so many things that can go wrong with that. That person takes that phone home. Anybody in that household now has access to those images. It could also get lost or stolen, and who knows what could happen to those photos then. You also have cybersecurity implications, and some phones have it so that images auto-upload to the cloud, and then it can be accessed by any number of devices. So it's really important that patients are armed with this information and know to ask to make sure that their images, their often naked photos, clinical photos, are being taken and stored within the practice, not on a personal device of a doctor or a nurse.
Yeah, and we've actually heard too people from the industry say they know that even practice phones, a mobile phone bought for the purpose of being only in the practice and taking photos, have been stolen. And you might think that security is on these things, but even when we look at the social media of doctors, and because now advertising is not really thought out by these medical professionals and they're just posting everything and not acting like medical professionals, you'll see things like them taking photos of their desk, which shows their computer, and taped under it is the password, which is just staggering when they're dealing with patient records. So do not trust that the practitioner that you're going to has their technology sorted and that your photos are safe. There's a lot more that needs to be done in this space. There are a bunch of other rules that exist now, but we'll put a link to that in the post associated with this podcast, and you can go and check all that out yourself.
It's important for patients to read that, even though it's a guideline for mostly medical doctors. Patients knowing what a doctor is and isn't allowed to do, I think it's very important for them to have a read of it too. Now, in terms of the clinics exposed for poor conduct, looking at the one that was in that first documentary, let's have a look at where these doctors are now and what's happening to these clinics. And I do want to say to those listening that we just want to put up a further warning here. For help with emotional difficulties, contact Lifeline on 13 11 14 or lifeline.org.au. For help with depression, contact Beyond Blue on 1300 22 46 36 or at beyondblue.org.au.
The first documentary that you and I were in and that the whistleblowers were in was about the Dr. Lanza practice. A lot of people ask us, where are all the doctors now? What has happened? So let's talk through where they are. Dr. Daniel Derbyshire. He was fairly new at the clinic. We mentioned that one doctor died. Dr. Daniel Derbyshire was due to face trial for allegedly kicking and stomping on a man's head in an unprovoked attack. This was unrelated to his work at the clinic and did not involve any other doctor at the clinic. Dr. Derbyshire worked for Dr. Daniel Lanza at the Dr. Lanza clinics. We do not suggest that Daniel Lanza was involved or associated in any way in the alleged attack. Derbyshire allegedly knocked over a 66-year-old man in 2021. He then allegedly kicked and stomped on the man while he was on the ground. Dr. Derbyshire died aged 31 and his funeral was on August 7, 2023.
Dr. Ryan Wells was an associate doctor of Daniel Lanza at the same clinics. He was featured in the third documentary. It had footage of him taking a blanket off a naked patient who appears to be unconscious to swat a fly, which was in the operating theatre. There was also graphic footage of fat being manually extracted from an awake patient's leg with bodily fluids spraying all over the wall of the room. The media also alleged poor patient outcomes and aftercare. So where is Dr. Wells now? Well, according to the National Medical Regulator's website, so when we talk about the National Medical Regulator, we're talking about AHPRA. According to their website, he is suspended. He is banned from practicing as a doctor anywhere in Australia.
Let's talk about Dr. Wong and Dr. Falahi. Dr. George Shu Kim Wong has conditions placed on his registration. He is not allowed to undertake any major cosmetic, medical and surgery procedures. Dr. Ali Reza Falahi has conditions placed on his registration. Part of the conditions state he is to only undertake liposuction procedures in a Medical Council of New South Wales approved and accredited hospital or accredited day surgery facilities. He must also practice under Category B supervision.
Dr. Daniel Aronov was perhaps the most famous cosmetic surgeon in the world, with 13 million followers on TikTok and hundreds of thousands on Instagram. He was an associate at the same clinics of Dr. Daniel Lanza. Dr. Aronov was ordered to remove any published material or information relating to cosmetic, medical and/or surgical procedures on all social media platforms, and is prohibited from publishing any material or information about cosmetic, medical and/or surgical procedures or any other treatment of a patient on any social media platform where this is available to be accessed or viewed by any person other than a registered health practitioner. Further to this, Dr. Aronov cannot undertake any cosmetic, medical and/or surgical procedure, major or minor, whether supervised or not. But Dr. Aronov is allowed to work as a general practitioner under supervision.
Now to Dr. Daniel Lanza. He also had millions of followers on TikTok and hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. Dr. Lanza retired and handed in his medical license. We don't know what else has happened since, but we'll update you if we find out anything. On to the Dr. Lanza clinics. The Dr. Lanza clinics and the doctors mentioned are all being sued in a class action brought by Madden's lawyers on behalf of all patients who have suffered loss or damage because of cosmetic surgery being performed at the clinics by one or more of the defendants. The class action alleges that each of the defendants engaged in misleading and deceptive conduct. It is also alleged that cosmetic surgeries were not undertaken with an appropriate level of care and skill. As of October 2023, there are more than 1,000 patients who have joined the class action. There are also a number of individual cases being brought against some of the practitioners.
That's the update on where all the doctors are now and what's happening with the clinics. Most of this information actually came from AHPRA's website and public register. So it's all public information. We would encourage everybody before they go and have surgery to check their doctor on that register to make sure they are appropriately qualified as well. This is going to be a really invigorating podcast for a lot of people because it is entirely about the dark themes of the industry. There's no public relations. There's no spin. And it's going to be a must listen for many patients, especially. But today's episode was really largely just about who we are and why we got into this and a quick update.
Please follow along with us as we do this podcast together. If you are considering getting a cosmetic surgery procedure or injectables, or someone you know is considering getting a procedure, we want you to have access to the best information so you can make the most informed choices and keep yourself safe. And don't forget, it's your body, it's your choice, but you're beautiful just the way you are.